direct from the web, it's Billy Masters Live. And now, please welcome your host, Billy Masters.
I have missed that. Oh, happy St. Patrick's Day. My staff is drunk. Nobody knows what's going on. And for those of you who are wondering why I'm not wearing green, we use green screen here. And if I wore green, we found out that you would just see all of our set on my chest. So you're getting blue today. Anyway, thank you, Monica, for really being on top of things today. I appreciate it. Oh, yeah. Well, now you got something. Today is Thursday, March 17th. We're back for our third season, and I predict that this is the way the whole season's going to go. It's going to be exactly like this. Thank you, Monica. You can go back to your bottle. I was thinking long and hard about who would kick off our third season, first show of the third season. And we were supposed to do an interview with Sharon Gless at the end of last year. Those of you watching know that I announced it, and we were pretty confident that it was going to work out. And then we had to cancel a couple of shows because one was because of technical things. The other one was because I was traveling on the day of the show. And then we just got backed up and we talked to Sharon and said, let's kick off the third season with Sharon Gless. And then it turned out to be St. Patrick's Day, which is kind of appropriate because Sharon Gless certainly is one of Ireland's proudest daughters. And I am very proud to have her as my guest today. Please welcome Sharon Gless.
Hi, Billy.
Hey, Sharon. You're down in Florida.
I'm in Florida.
A nice Irish girl in Florida. Do you have many St. Patrick's Day celebrations down there?
Not a lot. No, they attempted to serve an Irish meal on the island where I live, and it was a disaster. Everyone sent it back.
Well, it's funny because you say in your book, which I will hold up shortly, that when you and Barney got married, you did make sure he understood that he was not marrying a cook.
Yes, I made that very clear. I didn't have to tell him.
No. Well, that's the interesting thing about marrying somebody who you had known for, I guess, like about 6 years, right?
10.
Really?
I'd known him 10 years before we got married.
And so you really had an established relationship. People should know that, I mean, we're going to be jumping around, but actually, I want to go back to the beginning because I said that you are a proud Irish lass, but you are half Irish. You are a quarter Basque, which is the part I want to talk about, and also English. For people who don't know, Basque is like this weird combination, France and Spain, but they kind of have their own language and ethnicity and country. They're a very proud people.
Very, and the language is difficult. The food is fabulous, and you're right. They want to form their own country. They're in the Pyrenees between France and Spain.
And your family owns over 44,000 acres of LA County and were shepherds?
Okay.
Come on.
I had a photo that I wanted to put in my book that is really from our land with the sheep on it. And there was one sheep in the picture. It was our sheep, in one photo where one sheep was looking right at the lens. I thought, well, that has to be my great-great-great-grandmother.
Right. That's the performer who knows her angles.
Right.
I want to talk about the book, which is called Apparently There Were Complaints. And you said, I mean, I've interpreted it many different ways, and you talk about it a few times in the book, but I had read that you came up with the title first, which almost never happens, by the way.
I didn't know the normal sequence, but I did come up with the title first. And that informed the entire book and I didn't have to do a lot of research. I remember every complaint about me my entire life. And you want to know how I came up with that expression?
Yes.
Or do you, I was in part of the book is about my Irish bout with alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And I played a cop, Christine Cagney, who also was a raging alcoholic. And after Cagney and Lacey, it was suggested, let me say, that strongly, yes, that I go into rehab. And so I did. And there was a lot of scandal about it. Is life imitating art? Yada, yada. And somebody, it was all out there. So when I got out of Hazleton, it's a 28-day program, I was there 7 weeks. Anyway, a friend of mine said, "You were in Hazleton?" I said, "Yeah, I was." And she said, "Why were you in Hazleton?" And I just came up with, apparently there were complaints. And my boss, or my husband later on, Barney, was standing there when I said it, and he howled. And he always loved that expression. So I decided to use it for the book.
And you also, one of the things you say was that if you had to go through the list of medical reasons why you were getting sober, it would take so much longer. Let's just cut to the chase.
Oh, yeah. Please, yeah. So I did.
And for you, this was not an easy process. I mean, some books really, I'm always amazed at people who can pop out a book in a few months. I mean, this took you 7 years.
7 years. I did not enjoy being a writer.
Really?
I am now enjoying being an author.
And you are also a natural storyteller, because I've seen you do so many interviews, and you are very detailed in your storytelling, which I would think would lend itself well to writing.
Yes, it's just not a skill I had ever exercised before. And I think I may say it in the book. I was invited to CBS. It was my last series, Burn Notice, was ending after 7 years. And so, and that was on USA, and CBS invited me to come and meet them. And I thought, this is so cool. I'm going to get another series.
And not just CBS, we should say, but the legendary Nina Tassler.
Of course, Nina Tassler. And when I walked in her office, she said, "Welcome home, Sharon." I thought, this is so wonderful, because Cagney and Lacey was shot there, and several of things I'd done. And so I was there for an hour, and they asked all the appropriate questions as to, what it would require if I wanted to do another series, blah, blah, blah. And I was very positive about it. And at the end of the hour, Nina says, "Sharon, we own Simon & Schuster." I said, "I didn't know that, Nina." And she said, "Well, we do. And I think you have a book in you." I said, "Nina, I'm really not a writer." She said, "No, but you're a storyteller."
Well, there you go.
And she said she had the president of Simon & Schuster call me the next day.
What did you learn through the process of writing? I mean, did you learn a skill set, or did you make your own technique up?
I had to learn a skill set because how I started is not how it ended.
Really?
There were complaints from Simon & Schuster that my parents
At least you're consistent, Sharon.
Exactly. That my paragraphs were too short. I wanted to put people in who were not in my life at the times I was telling the stories. So there were a lot of complaints to get style that I finally came up with easily.
Did you write in a linear fashion, or did you tell whatever stories came into your head that night and then figure out where it went?
I told whatever stories came into my head.
How important was an editor for you?
I beg your pardon?
How important was an editor for you in terms of shaping the book?
Well, very. We never do this alone. No, she was very, very important. And she was very kind. We became very close after 7 years, 7 years of complaints from Simon & Schuster. But she was wonderful. And nobody, maybe Stephen King does it alone, but you need guidance, so they hung in with me for all those years.
You've said that you have enough stories for another book, but you've also said you don't think you could go through the process again. What do you think now?
Well, it just went on the stands in late December. So it's still new to me. Would I ever do it again? Maybe, because I do have boxes and boxes and boxes of papers left.
Oh, it's been, for those people who don't follow you on social media, and we're friends on Facebook, you have shown your storage units of files. You keep everything.
I do. I didn't know you knew that.
Oh, I've seen you open up boxes and say, well, what's in here? Oh, look at that. I mean, it's really amazing.
I was afraid to let go of anything because it was not easy. So
sure.
Even the junk, is still in the boxes.
Do you still have the house in Studio City? Because I know you had a place there.
I do.
Okay, so do you split your time between Miami and Studio City at this point?
Not so much, especially because of COVID. I stayed pretty much on Fisher Island, but I've been going back recently because I'm touring with this book, and so I've been going back again. I was born in LA.
So let's go back to the beginning. You have a very proud lineage on both sides and really strong ties, because you had one side that really is the Hollywood side and a little bit more well-to-do. And then you had another side that were really of the earth and the land and the hard work.
Those were the Basque.
Yeah. And
the Basque were the landowners, but apparently over the generations we lost it. But there are 5 streets named after us in LA.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You talk so much because for people who don't know, your parents, I don't know, should we say, had a difficult relationship? You've said they probably never should have been married.
Probably not. My father should never have married.
And your mother was
decent people. They just shouldn't have been together.
And your mother was really under the thumb of your grandmother.
Very much so.
And I came out
as
of
was
very
I.
conflicted. Well, and we're going to get to that, because really, at a certain point, your mother saw a way out. And you had to express it. And, I always believe the timing is everything. And your mother, you would come back from boarding. So, we're skipping ahead. You came back from boarding school and you said, I've got to get out. And your mother said it would kill your grandmother. And you said to her one of the most amazing lines in the book. Do you remember what it was?
It was something like you did. You did.
Yeah, and look what it did to you.
Look what happened to you.
Yeah.
And I always felt badly writing that line, because my mother had a very nice life, but she, her personality, I think, was very diminished by my grandmother.
Did she ever really develop a personality? Because
yes,
what in the book, it really sounds like she was reflective of who was around.
My mother, you mean reflective of her mother?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. She was raised in a very strict household, as was I. I mean,
you were raised in the same house.
Same house. You're so right. I was raised in the same house my grandparents built, that my mother was raised in, and then my brothers and I were raised in.
Although not exactly raised in the house, raised in a very separate, isolated section of the house.
Right. We were given what was called, when my mother was young, it was called the children's quarters. That was the part of the house my mother and father were given, and that we all were housed in. And my grandmother had a whole other half of the house that we were never allowed to go in. I used to sneak in. She had satin sheets. And once also, I sneaked in when she wasn't there, and I took off all my clothes and got in it just to see what it felt like.
And what did it feel like, Sharon?
Splendid.
You're a very tactile person. In the book, you talk about, like you describe smells and touches and sounds. Were you always very in tune to your environment?
I think so. Yes. Yes.
And certainly
I remember everything of that childhood as if it were yesterday. I'm sure I often wondered, since I've done this book, if there were things I forgot. that I was criticized for, but there was so much I was criticized for that I could fill books and books and books, you know. It
Sure.
wasn't a tragic childhood. It was I just had to toe the line, and I could never go out to play until my thank you notes were written, and
very proper.
Very.
You I mean, to the point that you were a debutante.
Yes, I was.
And at the Ebell, which of course you and I know from Los Angeles, which is a lovely theater.
That's where I went to Cotillion.
Oh, Cotillion was there.
That wasn't where I made my debut. The debut
Okay.
was in a bigger hotel in Los Angeles. But my brother and I didn't realize I'd put that in the yes, I did, in the book, where the Cotillion was. After like age 4, you start. I mean, sorry, grade 4, you go to Cotillion and learn how to properly ballroom dance
and interact with boys and
interact with
again
boys.
all the
And the
bowing.
boys had to take a handkerchief and put it behind our backs so their hands, perspiring from nerves, would not mess up our beautiful bows.
But it was is it the debutante that your grandmother had the dress made?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I you know, again, we're skipping, but we've got such limited time. I have so much to talk to you. There's 24 pages of notes. You had, you know, I don't think from the pictures I see that you were quite as fat as you say and as you're accused of being, but maybe I'm just seeing good pictures. You don't look fat.
The picture, I couldn't find proper pictures of me in boarding school where I was like alone or whatever. But as a junior in high school, I was 170 pounds. That's a lot.
And how tall are you?
5'6".
Okay.
170 was a lot for my frame. And there's a picture of me in the book having done Misery in the West End on stage.
Which I saw, by the way.
Right. Did you see how fat I was?
Did. Well, I thought.
No padding there.
I was just going to say, when I saw it, I thought you were wearing a fat suit.
No. When I landed off the plane, the producer said, well, of course, we'll build you a fat suit. I said, you don't have to do that. I just started menopause. I'd given up smoking. I was a raging mess. So I was perfect for Annie Wilkes. And I just kept eating. And by the time I opened, I'd put on 40 pounds. My husband was upset.
Yeah, that was interesting. You say that when he came out there and saw you, you said, well, nobody said anything when Robert De Niro gained weight for Raging Bull. And do you remember what he said?
Yes, he said, well, I don't know what Mrs. De Niro felt about that, but I'll tell you, I ain't happy.
And we should say, you know, we keep mentioning Barney. Barney Rosenzweig was creator of Cagney and Lacey, producer, etc.
I married the boss.
You did, and got involved with the boss pretty late in the show. 6th season, I guess.
6th season. All right.
But we'll get to that. But I want, again, about your grandmother is that she almost was, at least in the book, comes out as the pivotal figure in your life in terms of parental guidance.
Yes, I mean, my mother very much functioned as my mother, but my grandmother had a whole other purpose of how I sit and how I walk. And there were just rules that one abided by. And when she was in the room, it was scary. She was formidable. I don't know if you ever saw Anastasia.
I was just going to say, you compare her to Helen Hayes.
Yes, she's very much like the grandmother in Anastasia in that recognition scene.
But did she ever crack like Helen Hayes did? Did you see any vulnerability in her?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, when I, cheated on my diet one time when I was living with her, and my grandparents were separated. Those grandparents, my other grandparents were divorced. We're all Catholic, but hey.
And you tell a great story of when your grandfather, who was a very powerful lawyer, wanted a divorce. And how did your grandmother respond?
My grandmother said no. The divorce, and he said, "Why not?" And she said, "Because I'd be much better off as the present Mrs. McCarthy than I would as the ex." And he said, "Who told you that?" And she said, "The finest attorney I know." And he said, "And that would be?" And she said, "You." Because he was a big showbiz lawyer, and he used to tell all his famous clients, "Don't give him a divorce because you'll never be as well off." And she always remembered that. And the other reason is, Billy, that she was always in love with him.
But they never lived together after that point.
Not after that point. No, he moved to Bel Air and then on to Beverly Hills. But
was it hard for her living as a separated woman in those days?
Well, if it was, you'd never know it. She was very, very ingenious. She moved back to New Hampshire. She was from Binghamton, New York. So she was from the East Coast. So she moved back there and totally redid a house. There was things where you stop and have your horses watered and all of that. She turned it into the most magnificent home. And she wrote 3 cookbooks. The first one was a bestseller.
Wow.
So she never let up. She never was into self-pity. She knew how to move on and certainly never allowed me to go into there. So.
And we should say your grandfather, he had represented so many famous people: Cecil B. DeMille, Howard Hughes, Spencer Tracy, Cary Grant, the list, Louis B. Mayer, the list goes on and on.
Yes.
So he was really the entertainment lawyer.
Yes. In what they call the golden days of Hollywood. Yes, he was.
You know, and that's funny because I remember when I moved to LA, I guess now, I first went in 87, and I went looking for that golden Hollywood, and somebody told me, "Well, you're 50 years too late."
Yeah.
And you lived through it.
Well, Billy, I didn't live his life. You know,
no, but you went to a private screening of the 10 Commandments at Cecil B. DeMille's house.
That I did in Cecil B. DeMille's house. That's right.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, it is. But normally my life wasn't like that. He was, obviously a generation, 2 generations ahead of me. But but yes, I did get to go to Mr. DeMille's house for that private screening before it was put out to public.
So we're talking about, that's all on your mother's side. Your father's side, the most interesting thing, and you just say it in passing, is that your grandmother told you that you took after Grandma Gless. Is that correct?
Well, my mother's mother, yes, the one who was frightening. She said I looked like my grandmother Gless when I got up to 175 pounds.
So that was not a compliment.
Oh my God, no, she left the room. She started crying. I never see my grandmother cry. She started crying and left the room. I'm just standing there like some hunks,
And when but you loved your Grandma Gless, and she was the total opposite of Grandmother McCarthy. Is that she seemed so full of life. You would do plays for her and tell stories and sing songs.
Right.
Very
nurturing. Irish grandmother. My very staunch grandmother was English, but my Nellie Duggan was Irish, the one I would perform for.
And your mother told you, I don't know if we'd call it a fun fact or a warning before you went to stay with Grandma Gless.
Right.
Do you remember what it was?
I do. She said, your grandmother Gless sleeps with no clothes on. I find it unhealthy.
I mean, what a thing to say.
Well, I first of all, how did my mother know that?
Well, and it was not your experience because you did sleep in a bed with her.
We slept in a Murphy bed together. Yeah, she had a nightie on. But my mother thought it was, unhealthy. They just didn't like each other.
And so your father, in many ways, seems to be such a strong presence by his absence.
Yes.
And
but when he was in the room, he was a very strong presence too.
Well, you also say that when he was there, he was so dashing, and you were, in your word, besotted with him because he was just, again, you were his little girl.
Right. Well, I was his only daughter.
Right.
But yes, I was besotted by him. He was so funny. And he played the piano beautifully, or he'd move when he played. And he'd teach me songs, and I'd sit on the piano bench with him. And in fact, when he was dying, I sang a song to him that he taught me as that little girl called I Wonder What's Become of Sally. And I sang it for him. By then he was in a coma, and I could see his hands starting to move up. He was going, and his hand was moving up. My brother said, I think he's trying to cover his ears.
But, you know, speaking of your father's passing, that last night with him, you really got a lot out of yourself that you felt you could not let him go without saying. And you were able very cleverly to find out that he could hear you.
Well, that was, I asked the nurse when I went in, because I was about to just tell him all the feelings I'd had. He had pulled the plug on himself. He was on dialysis for 2 years, and USC, his football team, wasn't doing very well, so he wanted out. And
he waited till you were out of town to actually do that.
To do it.
Because he was sure you wouldn't let him.
Right. Well, the priest who told me what had happened, he said, Sharon, if he'd looked you in the eye and told you that this is what he wanted to do, looking at you, he wouldn't have done it. And it's so funny, because when he was dying, I said, Daddy, I'm the one of your 3 children who would have understood, would have supported you. But he did him. I walked in anyway to tell him all the things I needed to say. And I said to the nurse, can he hear me? She said, every word. He was in a coma. And so I didn't know. She said, every word. I said,
but you didn't believe her at first.
Right.
You because you were afraid that, well, maybe I'm getting this out and it's not making impact. So how did he let you know that he heard you?
Well, when I was singing, I Wonder What's Become of Sally, he started making a noise and moving his hand up to the sheet. That's my brother said. He started to cover his ears. But I said to him, I said, Daddy, if you can hear me, I went under the sheet and I took his hand. I said, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand twice. Because once it's been a reflex, you know, and he squeezed my hand twice. So I knew he heard everything I said. And shortly after I'd had my long speech, he let go. He waited for me to come back. And
your brother didn't make, was it Eric that didn't make it?
My older brother, Michael, who lives nearby, Michael didn't make it. Eric lived way down in Orange County, so there was no way he could have made it in time.
But you were there.
The doctor said that he has at least 2 more weeks to go. But as soon as he heard my footsteps, and I was back, and I told him the things that the priest said he needed to hear, the forgiveness and the scolding that I needed to say, and he let go. So it all worked out.
Was it, would you have had the same peace afterwards had you not gotten to say what you needed to say?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I needed to say those things I needed to say.
Isn't that interesting?
I don't know how much time we have, but when I was in boarding school, they sent me off to boarding school one day. And when I came back 3 months later, my father was gone. Well, it was all planned. My father had moved out the day I went to boarding school. It was all planned.
And they didn't want you to have to live through that.
They didn't want me. I had to eventually live through it, you know, but they didn't want me to be there when it was going on. And then it came time where he says, I'm done. I have to leave now. He told my brothers, but didn't tell me. And I was in therapy at the time. She said, you get over there and you tell him.
Good. How hard was that to actually do? Had he been conscious, would you have been able to do it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a very good question. No one's ever asked me that. I don't know. I hope I would have been able to, but I wouldn't have wanted to send him out feeling like shit, you know. I mean, I wouldn't want him to feel bad any worse than he did. Because he wasn't a very good father. But
and also we should mention that throughout your life after he left your mother, he never paid any alimony, child support, any of that.
Not after the divorce, no.
No.
He
And
fell
there's
on hard times.
well, I mean, there's so many stories. We can't talk about all of them, but
Okay.
there's a terrible story about a watch. People read the book.
Oh my
It's
God.
such a sad
I
story.
need a therapy session after I'm through.
I know. I'm sorry. I want to go to pod. So what I want to go to though is, as a kid, you loved going to the movie. Well, first you tried so many different things. You tried to play the piano. You tried to be a ballerina. I mean, it was like madness in the Glass house. I can only imagine. But you did love movies.
I did.
And was that an escape?
Well, when the divorce happened, I went every single day at Christmas vacation from boarding school. Every single day I went to Grauman's Chinese Theater and watched Rosalind Russell do Auntie Mame. I saw it 16 times, and Rosalind Russell was my therapist. I just became enamored with her and that character, and my mother didn't mind. It kept me, from crying. And I stared at the screen in Grauman's Chinese with my big... And in those days, you could sit in the movie, as many times as
all
you
day.
Yeah, right. So yes, movies. I was raised in Hollywood, so movies. We didn't have theater, darling.
No.
We had.
You didn't get television until later, too.
We got television when I was around 7 or 8, I think. Mm-hmm. So, we did. But the finest movies in the world were made in my town, Hollywood. I used to see the Klieg lights at night across the sky when there were premieres.
And you tell an interesting story, and this is worth mentioning. You saw someone you knew on the screen, and it occurred to you, oh, well, if he could do it, I could do it.
I did. I was in grammar school. I was 6 years old, and my grandmother, the fun one, the Irish one, used to take me to movies, and she took me to see The Kid from Left Field. So I'm sitting there, and the kid from left field is being played by my classmate, Billy Chapin.
Right.
I thought, that's Billy.
Whose sister was whom?
Lauren Chapin.
Right. Who played My Father Knows Best.
Kitten. Yes, on Father Knows Best. Right. But seeing Billy up there, it gave me the courage. I thought, if Billy can do that, I can do that. And so from that age on, I always held the dream very close to my heart. I didn't admit finally that I wanted to be an actress till I was 27 years old.
It was a long time. One of the things you thought about being, and I don't know if you remember, well, of course you remember, but you described it in a fascinating way. You wanted to become a nun for a day and a half.
Yeah, I did. And they turned me down.
Yeah, they said, why don't we put this on the table for a year and revisit it.
I thought she'd be so pleased. I was always in trouble in the boarding school. It was a Dominican convent school. And I was always in trouble. But I thought, gee, the principal's going to be so happy when I share my vocation with her.
You also, while in school, you found an ingenious way to get out of class and get sick. Do you remember how you did it?
I do. I don't know if they make that product anymore. So
ivory.
It's not like I'm pushing drugs, but ivory flakes really work.
Yes. And you would sniff them, and it would make you nauseous and sick.
Oh, the result was fantastic. I was sent to the infirmary immediately and ended up staying there 6 weeks.
Oh, my God. Well, let's not advocate doing that.
No. It was the era of the Hong Kong flu and things finally the nurse said, the only thing wrong with this child is she's homesick.
And they did end up sending you home.
Finally, they flew me home, and that's when I walked home and found my father gone.
But just one other thing before we leave boarding school. At that time, you learned a skill, something that you didn't know you could do. And the way you describe it is you taught yourself how to die.
This is really a lot of laughs, Billy.
I know, Sharon. I'm the comedian. I know.
Okay. Yes, I was going through a very, very dark time, and my parents were just divorced. Then we sold that big house on in Hancock Park. And it's like my father was gone, my home was gone. I'm locked up in a convent school. My mother and I were not getting along because of the divorce. My grandmother disapproved of me because I was fat. And it was the Hong Kong flu. And finally, we were all in the student body, and the head nun said, all of you must now take a nap. We're teenagers, but no letter writing, no talking. So we all went to our rooms, and I laid down, immediately dragged out my stationery and started writing a letter to my mother, trying to explain my feelings that were heartbroken, you know. When the nun caught me, she said, give me that letter, give me your stationery. There's going to be, you know, I was going to be brought down in front of the whole student body. And I just started sobbing. I cried so hard, that expression, I thought my heart would break. I couldn't stop. Now, I've been in therapy many times, and they all say, Sharon, don't tell this story. But I'm telling you. So, okay. So something came over me, and my heart died. The tears stopped. I stopped feeling. I knew I was able to absolutely function. No one would ever know what was inside me. And that night I went to dinner in the dining room with all my classmates, carrying on, ba-da, making the jokes, doing the whole thing. But inside, my heart was dead. And it was a wonderful skill. It saved me.
Have you used it since?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. I mean, you are an actress.
I have one friend who's the only one who knows. So if I arrive at her house, she looks at my house. She says, are you in there or not?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Nobody else.
You mentioned the house, and your grandmother sold the house, and of all places, your family was living in Park La Brea, which was quite a difference from this house. But two things you revisited.
My grandmother wasn't. My grandmother moved up to Carmel, but my grandmother got us an apartment for LA stuff. Which, of course, is that's kind of where my apartment is, very near there. So it's a fine neighborhood, but it's quite a difference from this mansion. And there were two notable times that you revisited the mansion. Once, when your mother, your grandmother, and you attended a wedding of a friend from the neighborhood whose parents bought the house. My very best friend, who used to spend every weekend with me there.
Well, so see, she knew the house. She's covered in your house, Sharon.
That's right.
But more interestingly, you went back to the house to film at Cagney and Lacey.
We did. I couldn't believe Barney picked that house, and he apparently said he knew that it was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Didn't you? He doesn't remember. He doesn't remember. But
I'll have to check his book.
Yeah. When I walked in, clearly everybody knew, because the crew, who is never quiet, as you know, the crew went silent when I walked in the front door. And I think it was out of great respect that I was back in my family, Nance, my family.
How did it feel for you?
It felt different. The new owners, after my friend sold it, didn't have my grandmother's taste, and changed the French doors to all glass doors. It was an old colonial home. Anyway, they had no taste. But after that, I made an offer on the house.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I decided I wanted to go home again. And it wasn't for sale, but I made an offer to the owner, and she said, I couldn't possibly sell it. Every day's Christmas here. And then she, of course, gives me the largest amount that's ever been sold in Hancock Park, right? And, yeah, right. And I just heard my grandfather laughing at me. Perhaps I should have bought it. But Barney calls me into his office. I don't know if you know this story, but he calls me into his office the next week. He said, I hear you're trying to buy Muirfield. I said, well, I made an offer on it, but it's too much. And he said, Sharon, you can afford that house. You forget how much you make on this show. You can afford that house. I said, he said, but let me caution you about one thing. The ghosts are not there, Sharon. Your grandmother's not there. Your mother isn't there. Your brothers aren't there. Sorry.
Sorry.
Anyway, I started crying in his office, and he said, so don't buy it for that reason. Buy it because you can afford it and you'd enjoy it, but don't hope you're going back to see them again. They're nothing.
So was it for the best that you didn't, do you think?
Yes, because I bought a house in Malibu with my Cagney and Lacey money instead.
Have you been back to the house since?
I've been by it. It's now the Chinese embassy.
No.
And they painted it all yellow. It was a shingles house, all natural wood with big white columns and a Southern Colonial, and they painted it yellow. But on the shutters on either side of every window, when my grandmother built it, my grandfather's name was McCarthy. So she had a shamrock cut into each shutter. And to this day, even though it's the Chinese embassy, they still keep the shamrock in the shutter. Probably some feng shui thing,
What a great story.
Yeah.
And I remember that you talked about there were carvings. The girl who got married had a heart with her initials in there. And was it your brother?
My brother, underneath the back stairs, in my grandmother's side of the house. We used to sneak under there, and we drew a heart with my brother's initials and her initials.
I wonder if that stuff is still there.
I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
They never saw it then.
Okay, we're so gonna run out of time. I've already talked to Laurie. I said I want to go longer. She's like, Sharon's got a tight schedule, so I told her, let me know when we get in.
You made me cry.
Well, that I am the gay Barbara Walters, Sharon.
Yeah,
Ed Asner,
better than Barbara Walters, honey.
Ed Asner did the show last season. It was one of his last interviews. And he'd said, I'll give you an hour, kid. And he stayed for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Yeah. And he said to me, you got me to think of things that I hadn't thought of in a while. And it made me smile. And I'm like, well, to get Ed Asner, who, of course, was your co-star in Rosie
O'Neill. The New Year's Eve before this one, I was sitting alone. Barney was at the beach or something. And I'm sitting all alone. It's New Year's Eve. And the phone rings. I pick it up. And I hear this voice saying, hey, baby doll. I said, oh, my God. He talked to me for like an hour on New Year's Eve. The two of us were sitting alone. Hey, baby doll.
He was sharp as a tack to the end.
Very.
And,
I'm going to his memorial. I'm going to his memorial in LA.
Oh, you're going back. Good.
Yeah, sure.
So we've talked about your grandparents. Your grandfather actually, in some way, is responsible for your career.
Well, yes.
Well, giving you
that's a long story, Billy.
Right. No, we're not going to tell it, but
I'll come back and do it.
We'll do another one, trust me. But he basically encouraged you. The point I want to get to is that you were afraid to tell him. You didn't even want to tell him. His wife told him because you were sure he would say no. And he was like, why would I say no?
He always told me throughout my life, you stay out of it. It's a filthy business.
And yet he encouraged you to go for it.
Well, I was 26 years old, and his new wife, pointed out to me I had nothing to show for my life.
Well, that was true.
So,
although you learned quite a number of skills because you had worked behind the scenes and you were very successful.
Many years, I was a production secretary. Oh, yeah.
To the point that when you started acting and going to acting school, somebody tried to poach you to work for him. And you said, but I can't. I have acting class on Thursday. And he's like, I'll give you Thursdays off.
Yeah. It's when I finally admitted what it was I wanted to do. My grandfather found out. He said, how much are the classes? I said, $150. He said, you got $150. Now what? I never, ever took money from anybody. You got to, now what? I said, well, I have to get a job, Grandpa. He said, okay, so you want to go home today? I just gotten there. It's Arizona.
It's a very long story about a car and an accident in Arizona.
And he knew when he was a thoroughbred racer, and he knew when a filly was going to run.
Yeah, you said that you had that look.
Yeah,
and it's funny because then when you left him and were on Were you on a plane? And you
I was on
looked
a
down
plane
at
from Arizona
LA,
to LA. Yeah,
and you looked down at LA with a completely different attitude that you had never had before.
It was like an epiphany. I had my $150. I had his approval. I was 26 going on 11. And I looked out over LA and I said, you know, I don't have a great body, great face, but I know I'm going to succeed. I know. I knew it. And I did.
And your first day on the set, Universal, you became a contract player, the last contract player in the Hollywood system. First day on the set, you heard somebody behind you. Do you remember who it was?
We talked about
Walter Matthau?
Oh, Walter Matthau. He wasn't on a set. Yes, he was on the lot.
On the lot, excuse me.
That's
Sorry,
right.
yes,
I was walking to the makeup trailer, and I heard this man.
Who you didn't know, just behind you.
Yeah, he was like over to my right behind me. And I heard somebody say, "Don't ever think that you are not a pretty girl." That's exactly how he said it. And I looked around seeing who he was talking to. And there wasn't anybody there. And then I saw that it was he. And I just, oh my God. And I looked at him, I went, oh, and he said, "'Cause you are."
And speaking of old Hollywood, you mentioned Jack Lemmon in the book, and I knew Jack somewhat. And my last interaction with Jack was at an Academy Awards. I'm telling this story because it relates to one of your stories. At an Academy Awards, and he said, "Billy, cover me." And he was going over to the bar to get a hot dog. And he said, "If Felicia sees me, she'll kill me." And you have a great story about a hot dog on the Cagney and Lacey set.
Oh, the hot dog story. That's right. It was in New York. And it was every hiatus, I'd really work to get my body back in shape because the costumes would get bigger. And I was did my face pumps and my exercises and was eating purely. In my opening scene at like midnight is me eating a hot dog. I'm embarrassed to tell you the story. Anyway, so I said to the prop master, I said, "That's a Nathan's, isn't it?" He said, "No, we just got it here on the corner." I said, "Oh, I couldn't eat that. No, if it isn't a Nathan's, like Nathan's Pure." He said, "Well, let me." So Barney appears, my producer, with his watch always on his wrist, saying, "What seems to be the problem?" That's a little threatening. I said, "They don't have a Nathan's hot dog here for me, and I don't know what that hot dog's made out of." He said, "You're going to eat the hot dog and do the scene." I was just, oh. Anyway, I did it, but I was so angry at him. I didn't speak to him the rest of the shooting that evening at 2 a.m. In the interim, he had gone down or sent somebody down to where Nathan's is that pier. The Coney Island. He had sent somebody down to Coney Island to get the mascot, this big, huge Nathan's wiener, huge mascot who came up and bowed to me. And I just started laughing and I started dancing with him, and the press got a picture of it.
It's a great story. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons you and I both fly out of Miami's American Airlines,
that's right,
is to get a Nathan's hot dog on the way to the plane.
I know.
One of the things that I love about you is you seem in the whole book very grateful. And I'm wondering, when you were young, did you always feel grateful, or is this on reflection?
Well, I was always told to be grateful.
Well,
I had, so that was always, put into my head. But I'm very, very grateful. I have tremendous gratitude for all that I had, the highs and the lows.
And you try to share a lot of lessons with younger people, particularly people who are going to go into the business. And you say it a few times in the book, take every opportunity that comes your way because you don't know where it's going to lead.
You don't know who's in the audience.
Well, you did a play at the Encino Community Center for 2 nights, a terrible play, but you thought to yourself, well, what else am I going to do? I'm here. It's a friend. I'll do the play. And
I was a young acting student. I had to audition for it, but I got the female lead. And what happened was the opening night only ran 2 nights. It wasn't very good. And we didn't charge anybody. But I made a mistake. It was opening night. I was nervous, and I played this nurse who had this long nurse's outfit. It was a period comedy. And I'm backstage taking off my nurse's outfit to put on my other outfit to play this other role. And I all of a sudden I heard I'm missing my cue. Oh, shit. I had to put on the nurse's outfit and get out there in time to give my response. The nurse's outfit was totally opened. I didn't have time to button it up. My hair was all down when it was back in a prim ponytail. My hair was down. I looked like I'd been getting laid in the back. And the audience went crazy. They thought I was some gifted comedian. It was a mistake. And it's one of those mistakes that made my career, because I got a call the next day at my office from a man from Publicity, Orrin Borston, at Universal Studios. And he said, "You're a brilliant comedian. I want you to meet Monique James, the head of our talent department, and John Cassavetes, and blah, blah, blah." I said, "Okay, cut the bullshit. Who is this?" Because I'd worked on the other side of the camera. I knew all that stuff, you know. And he said, "Why don't I have Miss James call you?" I said, "Do that."
Yeah, you do that.
Yeah. And damn, she did. And I went and read for her, and she signed me that day.
And she really nurtured your whole career. And one of the fascinating things, I've never heard anyone else do this, is she would bring you into a screening room to see your dailies. And she'd say, "Okay, see that? Don't do that. Look at this. This is good. Do that." Why are you doing that? And you really learned.
Well, I'm sorry. I think all contract players were put through that. At least
but not
new ones like I was.
Well, that was really camera training. I mean,
oh yes,
you know, you had no camera training at that point. That was it.
Oh, no, I had no training. But
well, you did have some training. You did.
I did eventually. But when I first signed with her, I was in an acting class, and she asked me to please stop going.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I didn't put it in there because I didn't want to say anything unkind about the coach. But the she said, "Anybody who goes to that class always comes out altered." And she said, I want stop studying. Start studying with them.
But that's the interesting thing about Monique, because she didn't want to tell you this, but said that your individual parts seemed like they shouldn't work, but when you put them all together, Sophia Loren said a similar thing. She's like, the lips are too big, the hips are too big, the nose is too narrow, but somehow it works on me. And you're the same way.
Yeah, I think she said your mouth, your voice doesn't match your walk. No, your voice doesn't match your face. Your swagger doesn't match your lack of confidence. And your mouth. And your mouth comes out of a Teamsters. And she said, nothing works about you. But she said, you put it all together and something happens. So I went out of that meeting still not knowing why she signed me. It was the most confusing critique I'd ever received.
And one of the first thing you got was a Marcus Welby. And what was interesting is you did the first 2 years, and then came in as a regular for a part completely ill-suited for you.
I was totally miscast, and they cut my hair all off in like this perm. It was awful. And it was to play the love interest of James Brolin.
What was that like, Sharon?
There was no like. I mean, we barely spoke on the set. I mean, he was very nice. He was very nice to work with, but there was absolutely no chemistry. It wasn't his fault. I was totally miscast. And so after a year where there was no sparks at all, I was fired. But I went on to other things.
I was just going to say, okay, so we get to switch with Robert Wagner. And you know that if you don't get this, you're going to be fired. Your contract is going to be dropped.
I knew.
And you did not do, yeah, right. And you also did not do the best, or the audition did not start great.
The audition with R.J. Wagner, with Robert Wagner?
Yeah, didn't you say that he really helped you in that audition?
Well, it was just Glenn Larson, who was the producer, and and Robert Wagner sitting across the room. Well, I was so shy. Every time I look over Robert Wagner, I'd go pink.
And he is Robert Wagner.
He is Robert Wagner. He just called me yesterday. Anyway, the description of the character was a Natalie Wood lookalike. Well, check it out, And I'd look over at him, and sure, he'd just be, and he made me smile. He knew what he was doing, but I got so shy that he made me smile, and I auditioned for him, and he wanted me. Glenn said, but that haircut she's got. And RJ, Robert Wagner, stuck up for me. He said, Glenn, that's why they have, because I was supposed to do undercover with him.
Oh, okay.
Cases. He said, but that haircut, it's kind of limiting, isn't it? And RJ said, Glenn, that's why we have wigs. So
then you asked him later, after you got the part, if he knew that was your last chance.
He said he knew that I was going to be out on Lancashire Boulevard. Yes.
But what did he say to you?
Fired. He said, I did. I said, did you hire me? Is that why you hired me? He said, no, I'm not running a charity. I said, I hired you because you were the best for the part.
See?
Yeah. And years later, I did a series called The Trials of Rosie O'Neill. I played his kid's sister, like in Switch. But The Trials of Rosie O'Neill, he became my lover. And it was so weird, the difference of, oh my God, now I'm going to be necking with him.
Not a bad thing to do.
Not at all. He's a very good kisser and very gallant. He's from the old school where if he's doing a necking scene with a woman, he hides her neck with his hand so you can't see any wrinkles. How cool is that?
You also said that Wayne Rogers was a good kisser, despite the fact that he seems to be a loathsome person.
Perhaps
I was
speaking strong.
And I was speaking to my friends and yours as well, Ray Buktanika and Karen Salkin, his girlfriend. And so I already knew the story about the party and Lynn Redgrave. We're not going to tell it. Go read it in the book. But I heard it for years from them. But the codicil to that was that Karen had left a roll of film in your house. And you got a lot of film developed. You said, oh, these must be Ray's pictures, and you messaged them over to Ray.
And she never got them?
She got them. No, she got them, and she thanked you.
Oh.
And she said, Sharon probably doesn't even remember this because that's just how she is. Most people would say, oh, these aren't mine, and toss them. And she's like, Sharon's the type that messaged them over. And
of course.
they're very, very fond of you, but they
were very good to me. They all loved Lynn Redgrave, and here I'm stepping in, replacing her under very unfortunate circumstances for Lynn. And
for you, because it's not fun being the replacement on an existing set.
That's not the first time I've done it.
Which is why you almost into Cagney and Lacey.
Right.
Which was you didn't want to be the third. You had already played a cop. And there was a guy involved that you really didn't want to be involved with anyway.
Right.
And isn't it funny?
Right. But as Barney says, actors are not always the best judges of material. So the third time, finally, I met him, Lusso and Frank's, couldn't stand him. And I ended up marrying him 10 years later.
Yes.
Right. But anyway, I finally got smart and finally said, yes, here I come.
And you also said that Barney was the first feminist you ever met.
Very first.
Yeah.
The problem with being married to a feminist is he says things like, you wanted equality, open your own door.
Wow. No wonder it took 6 years for you and him to get together.
Yeah, I think I was always smitten with him, but he pulled no punches. And he developed a show for women, the likes of which really has never been done again. Changed the history of television for women.
Tyne had said that the relationship with him was a permanent and delightful wrestling match. Did you feel that way as well?
In a different way. Yes. Barney finally asked that the two of us not come into his office at the same time.
Wow.
He said it's just too much. I can't take it on. So we do what he called the cuckoo clock syndrome. One of us would go in and leave, the other one would go in, but we never went in together. It was too much for him.
One of the most interesting things, you don't talk about it in the book, and I'm just curious to ask you, is you had gone in after Meg Foster had done 6 episodes, only 2 or 3 of which had aired. One of the episodes you did was a remake of one of those unaired episodes, Immigrant Worker, which Meg had already
I never knew that until this interview.
Oh, all right. Hi. Then my question, did you see the Meg Foster version, is irrelevant. Obviously, you never had.
I saw all 6, I believe. They made 6. I think they aired 4. I did see all of them because I wanted to see if there was anything wrong. Could I fix it? You know? And I saw some things that I knew I could change. But I don't think I realized that I had actually shot later on an episode I had seen of them because we were so different.
Well, and you also really made a point of strapping down your bosom, changing your hair, really making a physical difference between you and Tyne.
Well, actually, the truth is I was the one with the set.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So you said strap it down because it doesn't work for the character. Well, I was trying to
change Cagney. What I wanted to do was changing the relationship between Cagney and Lacey. They seemed to do even similar gestures at the time. And so I just started out as simply as when Tyne crossed her arms, I'd put my hands in my pockets. I mean, I'd do anything to make us different.
Right. If Tyne had a coffee mug, you had styrofoam cups.
Yes, but
I
wanted that for Cagney because that was very impermanent. And she was not anybody who wanted any permanence in her life. So, and Tyne's character was very, matter of fact, would wash her cup, put it away, I'd drink and throw it away. It was just, became these 2 totally different characters. And obviously I was the alcoholic and Tyne was the cop, the wife, the mother. She was juggling a lot.
But, it's funny. Tyne said once about you that Sharon managed to be blonde and a person, a smart blonde, a dangerous blonde, and a flawed. Sharon really loved that flawed stuff.
I do. I do. She was selfish. She was a lot of disconcerting things about her, but Barney said it worked.
Really?
You come to love somebody like that. I mean, she's so flawed.
Well, because it's an anti-hero kind of thing.
Right. And I didn't want to be, I don't know, you could say things on your show. I didn't want to be blonde with the tits.
Yeah.
It was just, when I first came on the show, a critic said, well, the blonde's from the Copacabana School of Acting. I was so pissed.
Yeah, but there was something funny that happened because of it. Who was it that gave you the graduation diploma?
Forgive me, my friend from
I forgot who.
From the house calls. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, forgive me. Anyway,
That's
he
all right.
came to see me on the set, knowing me well enough to know that really scalded that critique. And he brought me a diploma that he had made up with my name, saying I was from the Copacabana School.
Mark Taylor.
Mark Taylor, exactly.
I know that you want to do that. We, believe it or not, people are watching saying they're just getting to Cagney and Lacey and we're cutting it off. Well, that means that they'll have to come back and watch us again.
I hope you invite me again. Billy, wonderful.
I would love to. There's so much because there's your theater stuff, there's Queer as Folk, which I think that you really cemented you as an icon in the gay community.
I was very fortunate.
Although you were already an icon, frankly.
I was very lucky to get that role. I went after that one.
And you were willing to take anything. You didn't care about the money. You didn't care about the billing. You didn't care. You just wanted that.
I didn't care that it was shot in Canada. I didn't care. I wanted to be part of that.
You're really an actress's actress. And I think that,
thank you.
You've put a lot of your personal life on hold for your craft and for the projects you chose. And not that you didn't have a good time Sharon. You had a good time.
Yeah.
But you did
acting was
decide.
my personal life.
Well, you
was
make
my
a point, and that's the thing. I just want to end with, you made a point to saying you didn't think you could have kids because you really wanted the career, and the career was kind of your kid.
Exactly. And also I had such a wonderful mother. I think becoming a mother is the most responsible job anybody can ever take on in their lives. Be too much for me. And also I did love my career and I couldn't serve both. So.
And interestingly, when you told your mother you were going to marry Barney at long last, she said, well, you didn't really have great marriage role models.
That's right. When he asked me, I called my mother crying. She said, darling, what's wrong? I said, Barney asked me to marry him last night. She said, well, isn't that what you wanted? I said, yes, but I know because it'd just be to ruin everything. And she admitted, she said, well, you certainly haven't had very good role models.
I think that's a great place to end. Sharon, you are a delight. I have enjoyed this immensely, and we will definitely have you back again soon.
Thank you. You've made it a pleasure.
And let's remind everybody, apparently there were complaints. It's fantastic. And if you're really in the mood, if you're travelers out there, get the audiobook because Sharon reads it herself.
The audio's won 3 awards.
No, I didn't know that. And it's great because you also act out the things, you do the voices a little bit. And that husky voice is not a bad way to go to bed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
St. Patrick's Day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone, thank you for watching Billy Masters Live. We've had so much fun with Sharon Gless. I adore her. If you get to see her, there is a book tour. And so check the website, on Facebook, on social media. She is going around signing books, doing personal readings, and you don't want to miss that. We will be back next week with Sam Harris and also a panel discussing what's going on in this world. So we will see you next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. It's crazy being back on the air, but it's fun, and I'm thrilled to be back. I have to figure out where is the outro. Is that the outro? Oh my God, when you're not doing a show for a while, you forget what you're doing. Outro, there it is. This has been Billy Masters Live. I will see you next week. Until then, take care, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Remember, if we're here, God willing, we're live. Bye.